session, if we could start by standing for the pledge. Tim,
Yes,
would
ma'am.
you like to lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the
flag
flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
John, do you like Catherine?
Oh, I like that. Nice.
Come on in.
I'm calling all around.
Come on, we started, we're on camera already.
Morning, Jim. How are you?
I hope you won.
I was fly fishing in the Adirondacks and took a spill the wrong way.
Ooh, strong fish.
Did you at least catch something?
Yeah, no,
All right.
The fly fishing is meant
Yeah, I know.
not to fly, just to.
Absolutely. We'll see. I'm a little beat up.
Yeah.
You're the guy you're off.
Did you lose any teeth?
I'm sorry?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All righty, so we are on camera. So if you guys just want to start by introducing yourselves, so.
Yes, thank you for having us. My name is Andrew Kogar. I'm the president of Historical Concepts, an architecture and planning firm based in Atlanta and New York. And we've been doing work out east for over 10 years now. We had gotten to know one of the community members through our work with Hampton Bays, and we're invited here to present a proposal based on services that we think could be helpful to Riverhead. We have, as a firm, been in operation for over 30 years, doing both custom residential and commercial work, as well as planning and civic work. And
I don't-
our passion.
Doesn't sound like
It doesn't sound like it's on. John, I don't think the mic is on.
Is there a switcher?
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem at all. Our passion in our work is really understanding and researching local history, local precedent, local needs and uses, and designing to those. So each project that we do is unique to its location. I think the key word that we look for is appropriate. As such, our business has grown from the southeast, regionally, up and down the northeast and across the country. And each project, we love to get to know the community and really understand what it is that is special about a place and try and bring that forward into our new design work. And really, we see ourselves as facilitators for a community to be able to get collective thoughts on paper and then to create solutions that address those common thoughts. And then this is Elizabeth Dillon, the principal who heads up our New York office, and she'll be making the presentation with me today. And she was the project manager for the project in Hampton Bays, which we'll go into a little bit more detail.
Okay.
Excellent.
As we go through, again, as I mentioned, we design at all scales. This is some of our commercial architecture work, as well as getting into some of our civic work. That is a community college quadrangle that we did for a small town in Georgia called Fairburn. This is a conceptual master plan reviving a town that actually literally had disappeared and bringing it back, which it is in the process right now of completing its town square. And then, as I mentioned, precedence as a basis. Looking back at the history of both a local place as well as a region to draw from what was as well as what could be based on local context. This first case study that we're going to get into, and we're presenting two case studies, which is, we went through a lot with the committee, but we kind of focused it down just to two succinct scopes of work that we think would be germane to the proposal that we presented. This first one is in Senoia, Georgia, and this is really a close to a 20-year case study, starting with work very similar to what we're looking at with you all and kind of what's transpired over those 20 years. So this is what Main Street looked like in 1999. There was literally 3 families that owned about 5 stores, and they somewhat morbidly joked that they were 3 deaths away from the town closing up, 3 funerals away. And so what they wanted to do, they knew big retail was coming. They knew there were some pressures coming from Atlanta, from the growth in Atlanta. They wanted to document what they had, protect what they had, and do historically sensitive infill as opposed to just bulldozing, creating parking, and creating what the market would bear. So our first scope of work in 2005 was studying the historic Main Street District, codifying what they had and what they wanted to preserve, and creating some guidelines that would require anything new infill to be of that same ilk.
Can you just explain what infill is?
Infill is basically when you have an existing Main Street, per se, and there are either buildings that are condemned, lots that are underutilized, or a higher and better use for properties, how that you come back and strategically or incrementally develop those parcels, so literally filling in the rest of the street.
Okay, thank you.
So this was an example of some of the quick documentation that we did. These were all hand sketches and done pretty quickly based on some real need and urgency that the town had based on some pressures of developers coming in. So we were able to codify that and then use that as the basis for future work. The first project that we used as a case study was in 2007 to 2010. And this is what the street looked like when we studied our historic guidelines. This was the project that was done as the first infill project. This brought in office, retail, medical office buildings, as well as residential. It pushed the envelope from being all two-story Main Street to three-story to show them how they could still keep the historic character, but also expand and grow. This is still thriving and successful today. Now, from there, at the same time, we worked with the Downtown Business Development Authority to work on signage, to work on hours, and to become more of a cohesive business district. You can see this is an example of one building that had been rehabbed and refurbished. So this would be another example of infill where it was an underutilized building that had, instead of being torn down, had been retrofitted in an adaptive reuse situation to become retail again. So from being just 5 businesses and 3 families, now there's over 69 businesses, and it's a thriving community. The next project that we looked at was to the south side, which is called the Gym property, located in Blue. And this was literally on the other side of the tracks, but it was taking the case studies that we had learned from the historic infill and preservation and applying it to new brownfield development. There you're seeing the commercial district of that development in the pattern book that we created. The overall master plan for that new development showing a density of housing attached and detached, as well as retail. And just the use diagrams there, and the plan types, lot plan types. Going down, breaking down to the street section, the lot layouts on those parcels, as well as the historic architectural styles. So this was a study that we did using all local precedent. The town was actually quite rich in like Riverhead, in its historic precedent. And then showing what those styles mean in terms of translating to rules and guidelines for creating new architecture. Down to all the building elements as well as the massing. And then providing an overall character study and aerial perspective of what it could look like built out. To include a boutique hotel, restaurants, retail, and apartments. And then this led to the first idea house, a new house in this development, part of the attached product, and this was a brownstone that we developed that became an idea house for Southern Living magazine. And you can see this built house here. And this was a great way to generate. This was the most visited, and Senoia it's close to Atlanta, but it's not easy to get to. It is a destination, it's not an on the way. And they had the most attended numbers of any idea house they've had. And they've been doing these for a long time in a lot of urban areas. So it was exciting to see people getting in buses to come look at this house. And, and that generated real dollars for the businesses as well.
This is new construction.
All new construction. Then this next one is the farmhouse. And so this was actually taking an existing house, you can see that photo on the top right, and relocating it to this property and renovating it as a farmhouse. So we wanted to show somewhat of a more dense model the first year, and then the second year a more detached model, and how these could coexist in the same development of the same caliber. We were really fortunate Southern Living signed on again, and we have a great great relationship with a lot of the media magazines and with Southern Progress in general, but you know, this is something that is not just, this could translate here as well, this idea of bringing in magazines and kind of showing the before and after.
We'll have to do coastal living.
Yeah, and we have a great relationship with Coastal Living.
Yeah.
We've done idea houses for them as well.
Okay.
It's very similar. Nicole Henry's, she's also the same one that did the idea house for Southern Living.
Oh, very
I was
good.
gonna say, one of the first projects we did in the Hamptons about 15 years ago was actually an idea house for cottage living in Bridgehampton.
Okay,
Yeah, actually, that cottage living idea house is how we got our New York office. So,
okay.
so it's all connected.
It all comes full circle.
And I misspoke. It's Nicole Hendricks, actually, not Nicole Henry. But and then this is the spec housing that was done by builders. So what we've tried to show is a gradient of the adaptive reuse, the renovation, the new construction custom, and then the new construction for retail for spec homes. This is also another one of the spec homes. And you can see those styles are very distinctive to the area, and if the pattern book was developed, and it doesn't have to be just us. We've also done many pattern books where other architects have come in and built off the pattern books, and including this development, the two that we showed you were ones designed by Historical Concepts, but there were several other designs in the community by other architects as well. So the guidelines are meant to be universal to any of the architects and builders that come later. And then from there in orange, the Barn Street Market, this was now extending Main Street and creating an urban grid. So it's actually expanding the retail district where it wasn't before. It was just a one-street town, but now we're creating additional blocks in a traditional urban pattern. And not dissimilar to the opportunities that you all have with the river behind you and kind of going into, and you already have it kind of away from the river, but there are opportunities kind of on both sides of Main Street that we see. And here we introduced a multifamily product with retail at the ground floor and an interior courtyard that leads to a restaurant beyond, the restaurant in white there.
So were these existing historic buildings that were rehabbed, or they're?
So these are completely new. And
Really?
so we've gone from kind of preserving what was there, doing surgical and selective historic infill, to residential, kind of a few blocks over, to now commercial, brand new, one block off of Main Street. So for the full spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Gorgeous.
And so here you see again before and after. This is Main Street in 1999. This is Main Street in 2017. And then my favorite photo. Every year at New Year's, the whole town gets together for a town
There's only
portrait.
only 3,000 people in the whole town.
I know. But, I mean, you can see that, I mean, you can fit the whole town in a portrait, but what they were able to do in that short period of time with the right plan, the right growth, and the right kind of collective planning, a lot can be done. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth now for the Hampton Bays, which is our second.
Googled
Example?
Sonoy, and it said it's the wealthiest town in Georgia.
Is it?
Is it really? Well, I believe that after the Renaissance.
News to me.
Yeah, I did not know that. It wasn't when we started, I trust.
That was, well, 2010 consensus.
Interesting. So the second project that we wanted to talk about is what we've done more recently and more locally here with the Hampton Bays pattern book. So we worked with the town of Southampton, and they brought us on to do. We had three phases of work with them. You know, so this, you guys are probably all familiar with this area, but this was a fairly small study area just along the main street. They have an interested developer that was buying up land. They wanted to get ahead of it and make sure that they were guiding the form that the development would take and to be consistent with what the citizens wanted for the area. So you could see the study area goes from the Good Ground Park down to the train station, and it really was just focused on that corridor. So we had 3 phases, and we started with what we called data gathering, where we actually toured a number of towns, 17 towns up and down Long Island, looking at towns that were developed about the same time as Hampton Bays and kind of the form, the scale, the aesthetics, the details that those towns had taken. And we measured the street sections, you know, how wide are the driving lanes, how wide are the sidewalks, just trying to get the local language of how towns were formed and main streets were formed. So this is an example of one of those towns. You know, we actually, the second phase of that project was visual preference survey, kind of building consensus with the community. So we held a number of in-person workshops with the citizens. We also hosted an online survey here where we showed a lot of images, gathered feedback on, you know, what matches your vision for Hampton Bays, what forms, what materials are consistent with what you would want to see here, the scale of the buildings, you know, the scale of the sidewalk. So we got a lot of feedback here on kind of what local towns were closest in character, and then also just, you know, visual precedent from further afield as well, looking at the size and shape and scale of buildings. So we gathered all that data, you know, found kind of which communities the Hampton Bays citizens felt were most appropriate examples for what they would want development in Hampton Bays to look like. And then we did scale comparisons with some of those self-identified towns that the citizens of Hampton Bays cited as good examples of what they would want to look like. So here you can see in the upper left the study area that we're looking at in Hampton Bays. And then we took that same outline, you know, the same geographic area, and superimposed it over the other towns that they had cited. Southampton, Greenport, Southampton's lower left, Greenport lower right, and then Sag Harbor, and just showed the, you know, the juxtaposition of development within those areas, how dense the development was, the block size, the walkability, the frequency of buildings and facades, and the mix of uses that happened in that same physical area. And it was very telling. And so then here, this is just another way to look at that same study. This is what we call a Noli plan, where we're showing the buildings in black. It's just a very quick visual diagram to kind of see how dense places are, to see the block size, the frequency of building, the scale of the building, you know, the footprint of the building. And so you can see just Hampton Bays, you know, geographically, they're the two squares that we're showing. The study area was much larger than the areas that we're looking at in Southampton and Greenport. So those squares are the same scale. You know, these maps are drawn to the same scale. So you can see the amount of development and the building footprints and the scale of the blocks and how different it was from Hampton Bays to the other towns that we were studying. And so we really used that to show the citizens, you know, what the differences were between the places that they were responding to, so that they could have a vocabulary of, you know, what is it you like about Sag Harbor? What is it about that you like about Greenport? What makes those streets feel better? You know, it's the size of the sidewalk, it's the scale of the block, it's that there's visual interest as you're walking down the street. The buildings relate to, you know, the scale of the person at the street level. And then we took that feedback and really used that as the guiding principle to develop the pattern book. So the pages that you're looking at here are examples, excerpts from the pattern book themselves. We came up with a, you know, general regulating plan here, looking at where the density and the taller building heights should be focused. You know, really trying to preserve the character of Main Street and keeping the lower height of the buildings along Main Street to be consistent with more of the 1 to 3 story buildings there, and then allowing the taller buildings and higher density along the railroad and around the park, where there was more open space to support potentially a taller building. And then we even dove into the form of those buildings. So we looked at the massing, the heights, and working within the existing zoning. And so this was working within the existing zoning, but just making a few recommendations on really interpretation of the zoning. And then we dove into details, you know, so looking at the scale and frequency of buildings, openings and doors and windows, and just giving rules of thumb for kind of what the architectural components and elements of the architecture and the places that the community had cited as wanting to be like, you know, kind of giving them some rules of thumb to help ensure that the new buildings built in Hampton Bays would have that same character.
Can you just, what does frequency mean?
So frequency, like the frequency of buildings, as I was citing that, is just along a block, you know, is there a building, one single building facade every 30 feet? Or is there a building that's 50 feet wide? You know, how many different unique buildings happen along a block?
Okay.
So, I mean, you can think of density as the overall footprint and how much it's actually taking up the lot, but from a street experience, frequency is actually more important. It's that rhythm that's created about solid building versus void in between the buildings.
Okay.
And that rhythm and that frequency, depending how far apart it is or how together it is, can really shape the street and kind of the experience of the outdoor room.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
most of the historic main streets you think of are probably have smaller buildings, so there are more facades, more buildings, more frequent building changes along the street, which helps add to the visual interest and makes it a more exciting and enticing place to walk as a pedestrian.
Thank you.
We also got into parking and streetscape guidelines here and recommendations. Again, just kind of giving some rules of thumb on design based on the precedent photos that were identified in the visual preference survey in the previous phase. So really using that community feedback as the guiding light here, and then we got into signage as well. Focused obviously on the built environment, but also got into recommendations on signage and streetscape and parking. And I saw Janice just walked in. So this was the deliverable that we generated this pattern book and handed it off to the town of Southampton. And then they since have used that as, kind of the visual and the massing guidelines to inform their rewriting of the code for that area. That's the last page. And I think the exciting part about this Hampton Bay is I think this shows kind of what we were proposing as the third phase in our proposal. What we had presented to the town of Riverhead included 3 phases. The first one was really the visualization kind of analysis of the existing zoning and coming up with a series of diagrams to show you guys what is allowed by right now, so that you can all see, visually what does that mean. I know the FARs, the numbers, it can be kind of hard to understand what the outcome will be from reading the zoning. So the first phase was really trying to give you visuals for what you would get by right now, and then also meeting with the revitalization committee, the business advisory committee, reviewing the BOA, kind of the other recommendations, the planning studies that have been done already, and show you kind of the tweaks of what the outcome might be based on each of those scenarios. I think we had included 4 different scenarios based on those kind of sets of recommendations, so that you would have a series of diagrams, some of the sketches, the plan overlays, the Noli plans that we showed with kind of the black and white, diagrams, the watercolor renderings that Andrew had showed you from Sonoya, kind of showing you what the character of the street might be like. So that would be the first phase in really documenting, what you'd get right now, and perhaps what the different recommendations, how they would change that outcome. That is the first scope of work that we'd included. The second phase was
Time-wise, first phase 1, was that 3 to 4 month time or less than?
I think that could be quicker. It really would depend on how much input the committee wanted. We probably just need a couple of weeks to review everything, to do the first pass at diagrams, and then we would present that back to the town board, the committee, get feedback, and then we would probably need another, couple of weeks to generate kind of the finished diagrams and graphic exhibits. So that probably could be, probably 2 to 3 months would be generous to allow some back and forth.
I think in all the estimates that we provide, we tend to try and be conservative because we just, really a lot of it is dependent on client feedback time, so we try and give them ample time. But if we can speed up the reviews and the review process, then that can truncate the timeline. But it's also important not to rush it too.
Yeah, no, I'm just kind of just trying to get a general overview of what, the time that these things take.
Yes. And I think that's key. We want to make sure that the deliverable that we give you is going to be, useful and fit the needs. So I think it's good to do it in phases where we could kind of do a first pass, review it with you, get feedback before we prepare the final deliverable. So that would be the first phase. The second phase was more akin to the kind of data gathering visual preference survey that we did for Hampton Bays. So it would really be taking, the exhibits of what is allowed right now, and getting feedback on that from the community, kind of doing the visual preference survey, sharing some of that data of the other towns, and just getting that directive from the community, from the board, from the citizens, of what their vision for Riverhead is and what form they want development to take, and then identifying where that's consistent or inconsistent with the guidelines that you have right now. So that would be the second phase, is really gathering that consensus and coming up with a summary of, consistencies, inconsistencies, and hopefully identifying, another set of visuals that could kind of be the goal, the end goal of what the community wants development to look like here in Riverhead. And then the third phase would be writing the pattern book to show you how to get there.
And just timeline for those two phases.
And so I think it'd be similar. Probably the second phase 2 would probably be that same approximately 2 months, I would guess, to allow time for scheduling meetings and again, kind of multiple passes of feedback. And then developing the pattern book would probably be another 2 to 3 months.
So the survey, I saw that you had a lot of photos from the townships that the study area was interested in being like. So those photos up online and then also renderings here at Town Hall if people don't have a computer or...
Yes, and we did, for Hampton Bays as well, we did conduct, several in-person meetings as well as the online.
Okay.
I think it's important to say that the in-person is really invaluable because the feedback that you get real time, the communication, the depth of communication, face-to-face, just can't be replaced.
Yeah.
But the online definitely expands the ability to participate. So it's not an either or. I think it just greatly enhances the already, I think, critical in-person.
And how many of those in-person conferences did you have, or the renderings you set up where you invited the public to come? Because we've done that downtown.
Yes.
And I don't know if you saw the studies from that one. It was all part of the BOA, I guess you did. So I thought that was very helpful too, and very instrumental in trying to identify what the residents want.
And we know a lot of work has gone in already, so that, that is definitely the first phase, is digesting all of that, kind of using everything that has been done to date as the starting point, so we're not
in the National
reinventing the
Historic
wheel.
District for the residential homes, where you had mentioned that other townships had a lot of vacant land behind their main streets, and we have a National Historic District of homes that were built in the 1800s and the 1900s. So,
Yes.
what pattern book have you done for that scenario where it's a larger historic district and less vacant land?
And so that, it varies. Obviously, pattern books can take very different forms. There was the example that Andrew showed from Sonoya, which again initially was focused on the main street, and then we did the pattern book to guide the new development that was more residential, that was more focused on residential. In Hampton Bays, again, it was a corridor. So I think part of that first phase of us working with you would be to identify the study area, to define the boundaries, come up with that goal. We've done a number of pattern books that we haven't showed you that have been more residential focused. That is the kind of bread and butter of our work, the residential architecture. So we've done a lot of pattern books for both historic and new development with residential. We have worked in historic districts. Sonoya is not landmarked, but that was a case where we were really trying to respect the existing historic buildings. So we've done all of those different variations, but I think that's the challenge, is really just defining the study area and the goals once we start working together to really hone in what the pattern book needs to include. As Andrew mentioned, we don't have a one-size-fits-all. We don't have this document that we're going to bring you the same document that we did for Hampton Bays. We're going to develop it to fit your needs.
And does that tend to be the pattern with towns, especially that are looking to revitalize, where they'll do a section of it, as they did in Georgia there, where they do the section and then add an additional section as they move forward, instead of taking the whole big thing right away, maybe too much to
Yeah, I think
move forward
in some
with.
ways you almost need to, right? You have to kind of hold your ground, define the area, and say this is where we're going to start, and then be able to be responsive to the market. So a lot of what happened in Sonoya, which was great, it was a lot of joint ventures with private developers that came in. So that net wealth statistic may be because they also brought in in the mid-2000s a lot of movie production time, and so then a lot of the cast and crew ended up living in the town because there was places where they want to be. So, for example, the Walking Dead is a TV show series that's there now.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so I mean that definitely. But before that, there were several movies that were filmed in and around Sonoya. Look Who's Driving Miss Daisy. Fried Green Tomatoes. What's Eating Gilbert? Anyway, so a lot of that kind of slowly matriculated once the town kind of cast a vision, and once they were very clear about what they wanted and had those case studies in place, it attracted development because there was no guessing into what they wanted. The developers knew There was a brand, and there was a premium that went with that brand because it was preserving the historic character, and it wasn't gonna go away, it was gonna actually multiply, and the rules were clear. So at that point, several of those follow-ons, some of it was indicated by the master plan, but some of it was also reactionary to partners coming to the table and seeing what could be done in the spirit of what had been done previously. So I think leaving yourself open, wanting to identify and kind of look at it in broad strokes, but leaving enough room where you can kind of, within that framework, clarify and define with partners coming in is key.
And I think it's important also to not just look at the main corridor on Main Street, but also look at the historic district behind it, because
Yes.
a lot, with the opportunity zone that the town of Riverhead has recently been given by the federal government for reinvestment into areas, I mean, I think it was Riverhead and Wyandanch and just a couple of other areas. I think that, the idea was, and I see that it might be changing, to build larger buildings on Main Street so that you could fill up the historic houses behind it and not fear that those houses behind it might get demolished for a larger building. So I think it needs to be looked at comprehensively for the whole historic district and not just the main corridor.
Yep.
No, agreed. I think that historic district is a huge asset that needs to be
Yes.
factored in and enhanced.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of towns that we work in wish they had a historic district.
Right.
So that's, I think you're ahead in that aspect, and we would only look to build on that, not to
Terrific.
weaken it.
So it's interesting that you bring that point up, actually, because I hadn't heard that before. But, so that's why the pattern book works well, because it shows how things fit together, correct?
Correct. What we try and do is define, I mean, it's already, I find a lot of the language in a lot of these historic districts is very technical and dry, and it's accurate, but it's not necessarily graphically user-friendly. I mean, I see that as, like, recently we're working on a project in Sag Harbor, and it's in the historic district, and we're going through and we kind of understand what the intent was, but sometimes the language becomes, the literal language becomes the driver as opposed to the overall spirit. So what we try and do is graphically define those elements that are written and make it the significant and the historic and part of the register, and show that how you can build on that. And say, okay, well, here are the patterns that were documented, here's what they look like graphically, here's the rules of how they work architecturally, and here's how you can replicate that for new construction.
And I think that's worth noting. It's something, a unique perspective that we bring to helping to, write and draft zoning or planning documents and pattern books, is that we are also end users. As architects, we use documents and codes developed by other people all the time. We have a lot of experience with that. And we also every day are trying to figure out the best way to communicate, very technical architectural
Jargon.
topics and jargon exactly to clients, because most of our clients are not in the profession. And so we kind of have that, we play different roles, but we are constantly really figuring out how to communicate and make sure that, the architectural vision and jargon is clear to a broader audience.
So I have a question. So, like with George, I mean, obviously part of all of this is bringing the historic concepts back into the town, making it a cohesive town that people want to come to and enjoy and things like that. But then how does that then fit in, or where in size of buildings, size of retail space, as you're going through with the pattern book, how does that relate back to the current market? So that right now we know that downtown has very, very large stores because that was, what the town historically had, and that's what the market was. We know now that's no longer the market for downtown. So how does that factor into the pattern book moving forward?
Well, I think the pattern book is not meant to, I think, be a literal prescriptive, like you can only do historic styles or traditional styles.
Mhm.
I think that you can point to the kind of the architectural detailing is one aspect of it, but the other aspect of it is proportions and massing and scale. So I mean, almost if you take off the icing, what's the cake underneath?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we also look at how to provide rules for proportions and for scale that will be complementary to what is existing, but doesn't currently exist. I mean, that's how, like in the Sonoya example, they went from 2 stories to 3 and 4 stories, but having it work kind of cohesively. And that's by taking an understanding of the DNA, understanding the bones of what's here, and then looking at other regional examples that have grown and matured, and what are those patterns of development, because there's success stories and there's not so successful stories, and really looking at what was successful and then creating that framework for future growth.
Okay.
So it very much is not about freezing in time. It's about providing guidelines for growth, but in a way that's sustainable and complementary to what's existing, and not at the detriment of what's existing.
Okay.
Well, thank you for coming. I have an appointment that I scheduled a couple of weeks ago before I found out about this meeting today, but I think what you're talking about is very interesting, and I'm
Thank
very
you.
interested in it, so thank you.
Just
you
real
very
quick,
much.
Jody, back to your point, which I'm glad you brought up. So it's, obviously, it's always been important to the town to protect and enhance our historic district, but that's your specialty, so.
Our name is a
That
little
would
bit
be-
deceiving. You know, we're historic
But
concepts.
I'm glad she brought that point
Yeah,
up.
but most of what we, design is new construction, but as Andrew mentioned, kind of being historically sensitive and making sure that it's appropriate.
Yeah, so I think it's
Right.
clear, I think we
Thank you.
thank you. We do really
Just because
dive
something's old, don't
into.
make it historic either.
What's that?
Just because something's old, don't make it historic.
Well, correct, and I think, but the goal is to
Compliment was here.
complement what's here without losing what's here, and,
Yep.
but also not freezing anything. And so all of our work is focused on future construction and future growth, but in a way that's not kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're keeping what you've got. You're not jumping to the new next thing, and you're building on that continuum of what's already come before you.
But it's also not just recreating what's here. I mean, it's not creating copies of the great historic buildings. I think probably think about the places that you love, they're very interesting and diverse, and there's, a lot of different shapes and styles and colors and scales, and that's
Our
what
Main
makes them
Street for 80
exciting.
years has been facing the wrong way and too big of stores, but it was the shopping district 50 years ago. It's just not that way anymore.
Right, the market has
As
changed,
the
yeah.
walkable, right.
And just as far as other towns go, mostly they end up doing overlay districts for where you've kind of put in these first, second, and third phase, have spoken to the community, have kind of come up with a concept that people are looking to enhance a particular area, and then there's an overlay district for that particular.
And so yes, but that gets into kind of the means and methods, and I think what we focus on first is really asking the community and distilling what it is they want.
Mhm.
Then being able to graphically kind of show them and reaffirm, this is what
This
you
is what
told
you're
us, this
looking
is
for.
what it is. Yes, and then working with you all in the planning department to figure out the best way to kind of back into a strategy to get there. So overlay district is certainly one tool, but it may not be the only tool.
only tool.
And we will certainly collaborate in that discussion and in that strategy, but it needs to be a shared strategy.
Right.
Because implementation is just as important as design, and you can have a great design and falter on implementation. I mean, the good news is that we've had great meetings with your committee and with the planning staff already, and I'm confident that we can come up with a great strategy for that, but I just don't want to rush to one outcome.
Right, no, but that's what I'm saying, but that is the eventual, that is the reason for doing all of this, is to get to that,
Yeah,
to get to
yes.
that point at the end.
Yes.
Well, you need the needs assessment more than anything. Right.
Well, and again, taking a lot of the good work that's already there with
Right.
BOA, just
Yeah.
doing graphic comparisons of by right diagrams. Here's what the zoning will allow, here's what the BOA is suggesting, here's what the committee's suggesting, get the input, find out what that is, and then back into the ordinance.
Good.
How many of these have you done, similar to our size town?
I would say between 15 and 20 of your size town. I mean, just in different scales. We brought some other examples with us as well. But again, it's really not one size fits all. It's really about understanding the needs of the community and kind of catering. The process is very similar, but the deliverables and the outcomes are unique to each
Sure.
community.
Any questions for?
No? 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 It's just we've done a lot of this over, the last 20 years, really. I've got a drawer full of, visions but
Yep.
it seems to be an ever-changing thing. So I think what you're presenting is something that's a little more sustainable, something that's a little more long-term. I like the way you're phasing it in, because the town's changed so much in 20 years from what it was.
It's also making sure that you're utilizing the previous investments of those studies and using that as our starting point and just, updating and trying to figure out the best way to communicate that so that everybody understands what they're getting moving forward.
So you kind of try to look at everything. You look at the past studies, you look at what's existing, you listen to the community, you look at development that's trying to come in, and, businesses that are there already, and try to pull it all together
Yes.
and see what our community wants. And from what you're saying, it streamlines the process. It's helpful to the developer.
Takes a lot of the questions out of it, if kind of that consensus building has already happened and a developer knows that, if I propose something consistent with this vision, the town board is already on board, the citizens are on board, it's kind of the path of least resistance.
So,
That's why implementation is important, though. It's not just, it's that crucial third part, is that we've got to be able to have a way to get from this vision to reality, and working with planning staff and committee is key on that.
and I think, as Jim was saying, and Catherine, I think we have, as a town, over the past 20 years, we've done a lot of the groundwork to get to there, and I think this is kind of the final part where we have all the studies, we kind of know what we, everything has been studied, but then now to take it to the deliverable portion of it, where somebody can come in and see what it is that the, like you said, the consensus has been built on. So I think that's a big help.
What I liked is when you were showing us the project in Georgia, that a lot of the new construction replicated old construction. And I think that's a great idea. Around here, we seem to think the opposite. If it's old, don't build new to look old because it's not right. And I think that was a perfect example of where you built new, some to look old, and it blended in perfectly. I really like that.
Well, and it's interesting, thank you, and that was the intent, but rather than trying to look old per se, what we were just doing was using the simple, straightforward masonry details
Right.
that were already on the street. So we didn't try and put a patina on it, we didn't try and fake anything, we just built off of the
Right.
examples that were there. And the only reason I'm trying to make that distinction is because I think some people think that then you're forced to be historicist or it can be Disney. And that's not it at all. It was
Right.
just simple, earnest construction. And when you look at that, it was one storefront elevation and sometimes two if it was on a corner. And it wasn't any actual more material. It was just a little bit more time and labor. But instead of getting our aesthetic from 5 different materials on one facade, which seems to be the rage in contemporary architecture, it was just all brick with some shadow lines.
Mhm.
I mean, so you could say old or you could say simple, earnest.
Right.
It really is just taking cues from what's there, not trying to be anything more than what it is. But all that said, and we have an example from Lane Park, there are going to be developers that want to bring in something that maybe is more contemporary, more new. And that's fine too, and we can accommodate that as long as it falls into the percentages of glass and wall that are going to be prescribed, the massing that's going to be prescribed, that rhythm of the street. Because modern architecture can actually complement historic architecture quite well. They just have to kind of work from the same point of proportions and scale, and have the same goal towards the street and towards the public good.
Right.
Do you have some examples with you of that?
Yes. Not in a digital, but I can hand it out.
Well, and I am glad you brought that point up, because that's been a concern of some of the boards, that we would get, everything's falling, we would get fake, a fake look or something Disney-like, and that's not what you're proposing at all. You're
No.
proposing taking what we have and building upon that, highlighting that.
Exactly. I think part of the historic aspect is that that some of those details, the simple brick details, are a little bit of a lost language because people aren't codifying them and creating the rules, and current developers or builders aren't necessarily requiring it, so the masons aren't doing it. Back in the day, architects could just do a sketch and the masons understood how to do an arch,
Right.
understood how to do a swatch. Now you have to draw it out, but it can be done. But so it's more about reviving that aspect of tradition than it is demanding that that's all you have. So.
We do have this digitally introduced.
Oh, you do have it digitally? Oh, perfect.
Now, does this pattern book address, I know you talk about streetscapes, but shadowscapes and all of that?
So it does address, when we get to the street sections and to the landscape, there'll be clear cast solar, shade on the street. I mean, that really drives a lot of the width of the street and the building heights.
Sure.
But then we'll also look at awnings and things like that. So it's not a complete shadow study per se, but that's factored into some of the other diagrams that we create for the illustration purposes. So this was a new development in a historic area outside of Birmingham called Mountain Brook. And you can see the buildings that are in color were the buildings that we were in block structure that we were proposing. The buildings down in the white down below were the 1920s and 30s historic, and this was another National Historic Landmark. It was one of the first shopping retail centers, suburban retail centers in the U.S. So, like the Plaza in Kansas City, this was kind of in that era. And so what we did was we studied the building heights, the street layouts, the sections, and presented in conjunction with the new. If you keep going, then we looked at the massing, and this is similar again in process to some of the things we've already showed you, but we're going to just skip to the architectural standards because you can see this whole front part was all about scale, relationship, proportion. It's style neutral, right? And then at the end we get into, now that we've laid out all these proportions and all these fenestration and door and window requirements, then we get into the architectural styles. And so here we started out with Village Romantic, which was taking what was already there. It was a complete Tudor village, and a lot of that Tudor language was put into the historic designation. So we were breaking down what those elements were, specifically to Lane Park, and then showing other examples of how you could build new within that same language. Let's go through this. And then we had 3 or 4 other styles that we took that were traditional historic styles from in different parts of Birmingham as well as around Mountain Brook. And then the last one, because this was a specific request from the developer, was a more contemporary modern language. And you can see here what we did was we looked towards the industrial historic legacy of Birmingham, which had huge expanses of glass. I said, okay, even within kind of this modern glass-to-wall ratio, there are still rhythms, there are still rules that we can extract. And we pulled in more current, the top 2 examples are very new from the last 10 years, and looked at some more modern details as well. And so that worked because there was tension between the developer of one parcel and Mountain Brook, and we were actually brought in kind of way late as a third party, neutral third party, to kind of avoid legal conflict between the two, because the existing guidelines that Mountain Brook had didn't actually negate what the developer wanted to do. But clearly the community was up in arms because it wasn't going to look anything like the rest of the village. So this was a way to kind of find a common ground. And a lot of it came down. I mean, not legally, but in essence, yes.
Yeah,
that's what
sure you
ended
did.
up happening. And you all have the position to be able to do that proactively instead of reactively, which is much better.
Well, there's something to be said, I think,
That's yet to be seen.
from an outside entity stepping back and looking and helping bring it all together for us.
And that's, again, the historical concepts name is a little misleading, but the concepts part of it is meant to be that it's more about the process and the approach. And so we really try and keep design ego out of it. It's really trying to express what's good for you all based on what you're telling us. And by staying somewhat style neutral in that aspect, but still being very informed and allowing the historic styles to come back, we hopefully do kind of keep that Switzerland approach and maximize your opportunities with developers.
It's always
but in a
good to
way-
be Switzerland.
Yeah, right. But in a way that will, I think, still create a cohesive built environment, regardless of style in the future.
Well, I missed the final product. Did you show the final product on the building that you had to?
Oh, no, we need to go back and photograph
Yeah, we
that,
haven't
actually.
photographed
No, so what's been built so far has been the boutique hotel, and they had to stop in the work because there was a huge federal DOT highway flooding issue that they had to rework. So we should send some photos of the hotel and the supermarket area, because I was just there actually a month ago. I was like, we need to photograph this, but we can send that to you all. But long story short, no lawsuits, development's moving forward, all parties are happy in the community. This used to be a hot button issue for several years in a row, and now it's quieted down and development is chugging along.
It's beautiful with the square in the middle.
Yeah, so that bottom part with the roundabout and kind of that first arc, that was all the existing historic village. So then the 4 blocks north of that is what we had worked on as a new development opportunity.
And certainly in Riverhead for many years, we've talked about public space and, highlighting along the river in some way.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Riverhead's a great community already, but we see lots of potential in terms of what you have in place to kind of bring that public space into the narrative and expand Main Street beyond just one street. I mean, it's already a good block structure, but really kind of making it more cohesive from the river to Main Street and beyond. But we've been fans for a while. When we first started doing work, and I think I mentioned this
I
before.
saw a couple of our pictures
Yeah,
in there,
yeah.
the Hampton Bays stuff.
When we first started doing work in the Hamptons, we would always stay in Riverhead, and
well, that's good.
I mean, it's a great location and great
8 miles away-
restaurants
8
and
miles
it was
away to
great,
Hampton
great
Bays.
buildings. So for us, this was actually really exciting.
We're
to
really
be able
excited
to
about the opportunity.
present to you all.
And I think like what Jody was mentioning about the historic district with the homes right behind Main Street, I think Greenport has done a terrific job of being able to promote and revitalize their historic homes over there that integrates into their Main Street also. So, I mean, we have a shining example of that just, not too far away.
I would agree. I was actually in Greenport this weekend, and
Yeah.
you're right, they've done a great job of all of the components, like you said, revitalizing the historic houses,
Yep.
kind of reinvigorating the storefronts, the shops, and then also the waterfront as
Yeah.
well.
And they're thriving.
Yeah.
Did Janice and Jim, did you guys want to come up, or do you have to go and ask some questions or talk for a minute?
You okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Come on up.
Thank you. Good morning.
So I'm just gonna have you guys, I know
See, you
you've been
guys
here
were
before, but
matching.
just introduce yourselves once again, both from the Downtown Revitalization
Yes.
Committee, so.
James Farley, Downtown Revitalization Committee, co-chair.
Janice Shearer, co-chair, Downtown Revitalization Committee, and as you know, also planner for Southampton. Here on my personal time, and so happy that we could ask Historical Concepts to be here because we were so pleased with the work they did there, and that's why I recommended them. They did a great job with the community, with all the different stakeholders who had, just bringing people together, and really they listened to everything that everybody was talking about in terms of, their property and their values and their space and all of that, and then people who didn't want it, did want it, whatever, and tomorrow is our first public hearing on this whole
Okay.
effort. We wrote the form-based code in-house in the planning department. Tomorrow we're having our first public hearing on this effort, and we're in Southampton. And we hope that it's going to, go well. So far, we've had a lot of outreach with the community. The town of Southampton did a generic environmental impact statement. I just want to make sure you understand that any zoning you propose, you need to then back it up with, this BOA study and anything else is in this pattern book. You just need to assess those impacts in order to move forward to rezone. So
Well, I think,
that's
I think
important.
you're aware
Yeah.
that we're looking to update the master plan, and, downtown is such a unique area, so to be able to have something like this to then moving forward with an update there, I think is
Sure.
important.
I do too, and I think that, any zoning you propose, as long as it's in line with your comprehensive plan, that's the impetus to be able to zone anything, right? So you really need that community component and the, bringing together all of this in a visual context. I have spent the better part of 16 years, arguing with people over design. And we decided this is just like a waste of time, let's just do the work up front, and then it just goes so much faster. And so, we're doing this in Hampton Bays for new development, but we also, hope to replicate this process in other hamlets as well.
Are there any things you think they might reasons you might want to bring up, or things they might want to discuss that make them this good for Riverhead or unique to us?
I think everything they just said is exactly what we need and what we're missing. We've been asked on this committee, I was asked to participate and review all of this stuff, and give a recommendation. But as I told you the last time when we were here, that recommendation would be completely arbitrary without really understanding truly what this plays out as. And so I think as a professional, I would want this information in order to hang your hat on, in order to really move forward with a zoning code that you can defend, that you can say, this is why we're doing this, this makes the most sense. And it's not about 3 stories versus 5 stories to me. It's about how you're gonna fit it into the context and create those forms and proportions that make sense.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And on a more commercial note, I'll throw garble to this lip.
Oh, yeah. Get a hiking accent. You
Uh,
gotta be a little
you-
louder.
You mentioned the opportunity zone and that, and one of the key things to making a great opportunity zone investment is to having a clear vision that people can buy into. And so it's really important, because, you know, opportunity zone investors will be looking for a quality investment first and foremost. If there's an opportunity zone that goes with it, that's icing on the cake. And so
Understand all
the
that.
key thing here is to make sure that we've got a really clear, unified vision as to where we're going. And I think that'll help that whole process a lot.
I agree.
And I think the key to
And
that,
something that developers can look at with and see a return on investment as well.
Absolutely, and they can really understand the value proposition and saying, well, they want these better quality materials and they want this kind of form and function, but this is going to allow me to, they could really do
Yeah.
that work and understand that, pro forma or whatever basis.
I don't think we're too far off, I think.
I don't think you
little
are at all.
Polishing it, I think we're right there.
and I think one of the unique things about the Opportunity Zone is it is a long-term investment in the community. I
It
mean,
is.
that is what it is.
That's the big result.
Yeah, that's the big result. So I think people coming in to invest want to know long-term what they can expect in their next building next door.
Next generation, it's not us, it's the people coming up after us that have to.
And I would also just note, again, that it's your investment that spurs more investment. So to invest in this work upfront is what makes people feel like, I can take a risk because the town took the risk. And that's a good use of taxpayer dollar, to pay for something to emulate what the community is saying they want. So you understand that, you say, this is, we have it here, and you did that so far with the BOA and all the other studies, but this is just another type of study, but it's your investment to get to that future that you're.
We haven't
It's
talked
the one
about that,
that's
what's our investment? We haven't talked about that.
Well, I think, I think this is the practicality of all the studies.
Yes.
I think that's the whole point of it. We
You
have
guys
all
are
of these
donating
studies
all
telling
that
us what to do, and this is the practical portion of it for somebody coming in.
Really, it is. And in your planning department, which is quite light on staff, it takes a lot of time off of people's hands to be able to say, just look at the pattern book. And then you can come back when you've got some concepts sketched out. And that saves a lot of time. So, there's that. Oh,
Jody, too.
Sorry to call you guys up at the last second.
No,
I
not
know you
at
have
all.
to go to work.
Yes, but I'm just, I'm excited to be here. I hope that you move forward in this way, because I think anything you want to suggest in terms of zoning will be able to be defendable, and that's a wise thing to do.
And just a true consensus.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think that's part of it. I think there's a lot of, there hasn't been a forum for consensus at this point in community outreach to get feedback that then translates into when a developer comes, what it is that they want to build, and what the community wants. So I think, like I said, this is the next step to being able to do that, so.
And I don't know if this is helpful, but I mean, one nuance is that part of our deliverable will also be kind of showing how this isn't just another study or a new study, which sometimes can spook developers if it's like, okay, well, they keep changing their mind. We will encapsulate and show how this is exactly the kind of culmination of a process that you all have done. So instead of looking like it's very kind of scattershot, we can present it as a cohesive process. And the work that you've done is significant. And I think building off of that and linking our work directly to that then shows how you all have been working steadily for the last decade or more to culminate with this.
Right, and maybe tweaking local codes and stuff like that, and
But how you present it to developers makes all the difference. And I think that the opportunity
but
is
that's
there
money.
to show this as a sequential process.
Well, it's always, hurry up, and then you get there and you're like, ugh, this isn't what we really wanted, and then it takes even longer. So that's a waste of time, just do it
You mean when
upfront.
people are coming in and
Well, they're like, we need this
then
now,
we
right
have to
now,
have
we
redo it.
wanna build tomorrow, and then they give you a proposal and you're very uncomfortable, and the community's up at the podium online saying, we hate it, and, you know, it just drags it out. And so it's just saving time on the back end to invest in the time up front. So it's really
Being
time-
proactive moving forward.
Being proactive saves time and money, cause they don't have to keep paying for architectural plans to revise it and revise it and revise it. Nope, not this, no, it's still not right. You know, you don't have to do that anymore. So, thank you.
Now that you picked up the mic.
Thank
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you all for
Appreciate
allowing us
it.
to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
I'm
Yes.
going to Sonoy.
Okay, great. We can pick you up at the airport.
Well,
Thanks again.
I'm going,
No,
I'm going to Georgia in August, I'm gonna swing by there.
Oh, you should.
There's,
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Have a
Thank you.
good
Actually,
day.
our
Feel better.
population is 4,200.
Oh, thank you.
It's up, it's up.
And it is also the wealthiest town
Thank
in
you.
the state.
Well, now, see what they did? They made it the wealthiest town in the state.
And you've got a picture of all your work there.
But we've done similar work in Columbus, Georgia, which isn't too far away, about an hour and a half down the road, as well as in Peachtree City, Georgia. So honestly, if
In
anyone's in that
Peachtree?
area, in Peachtree City, only in Georgia.
Oh, yeah, only in Georgia you're gonna have
Is that because
Peachtree.
of you?
Which one's that?
Sonoy,
Well, I
back in
mean,
business?
it's really the community, but I think we helped, for sure.
All right, I'm gonna do a first and a second to, I don't have to do,
You don't need a first,
yeah,
second.
all right.
We're adjourned.
And we're done with work session. Thank you, Larry.
You gotta get rid of that water tank.
Andrew, I just wanna say